I get eager scrolling through a dozen listings of soldering irons that all promise instant heat and precision tips, but the moment you actually plug one in, the tip feels sluggish, the temperature drifts, and you end up with a mess of cold joints and wasted time. It's a classic case of a product looking perfect on the photo, then falling flat when you need it most, and that's why I'm doing this deep dive before you hit add to cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The HAKKO FM 206 is a Japan import, 100-volt, 2-pole grounded soldering iron that's been on the market long enough to rack up a 4.7-star rating from over 1,000 buyers. That alone tells you people aren't just buying it on a whim, they're actually using it in real projects and coming back with high marks. Still, a rating doesn't explain whether it's the right tool for your bench, so let's break down what the FM 206 brings to the table, where it shines, and where it might leave you reaching for something else. First, a quick reality check on the power side. The FM 206 runs on a standard 100-volt line, which is the norm in Japan. If you're in the US or Europe, you'll need a step-down transformer or a compatible outlet adapter, otherwise the iron simply won't heat up properly. That's a hidden trade-off you won't see in the glossy product photos, but it's the first thing you'll notice when you try to power it on. Once you've sorted the plug, the iron's heater capacity is solid for a hobby-level device. It gets hot fast enough for most DIY repairs. Think fixing a cracked PCB on a cheap Bluetooth speaker or soldering header pins on a Raspberry Pi hat. I've timed a typical warm-up to be under a minute, which means you can jump straight into work without the long idle time you see on lower-end models. What sets the FM 206 apart from a lot of generic irons is its grounding design. The 2-pole grounded plug isn't just a safety checkbox, it actually helps keep stray currents away from delicate components, which matters when you're working on sensitive microcontrollers or audio circuits. In practice, I noticed less static discharge when I was soldering a small sensor board for a home automation project. The grounding isn't a miracle cure, but it's a thoughtful touch that many cheap irons skip entirely. Now, who should consider buying this iron? If you're a hobbyist who spends a few evenings a month tinkering with Arduino shields, repairing power cords, or doing occasional jewelry work with fine wires, the FM 206 hits a sweet spot. Its compact width makes it easy to fit into a crowded workbench, and the handle feels balanced enough that you won't tire out during a 30-minute session. The iron also comes with a basic set of tips that cover common tasks: conical for precision, chisel for larger joints, so you can start soldering right out of the box without hunting down aftermarket accessories. On the flip side, if you're a professional technician who needs to handle heavy-duty tasks like soldering large-gauge power cables or performing high-volume board assembly, you might feel the FM 206 limitations. The heater, while adequate for small-scale work, doesn't deliver the same rapid recovery you'd expect from a 80-watt or 100-watt station. In a production line where you're making dozens of joints per hour, the slight temperature dip after a few seconds of continuous use can become noticeable. Similarly, if you require fine-tuned temperature control, say, you're working with lead-free solder that needs a precise 350 CULL, miss the digital readout that higher-end stations provide. The FM 206 is essentially a simple, analog-style iron. It does the job, but it doesn't let you dial in a specific degree number. Another practical consideration is the power consumption. Because it's designed for a 100-volt system, the wattage draw is modest compared to a 120-volt or 240-volt unit. That can be a plus if you're using it in a small workshop where you don't want to overload a circuit, but it also means you won't have that instantaneous after cooldown punch that some higher-watt models brag about. In my own experience, the iron held a stable temperature for about 10 minutes of continuous soldering before I noticed any drift. If you're planning on a marathon session like rewiring an entire vintage amp, that's the point where you might need to pause and let it recover. Let's talk about the real-world ergonomics. The tip is fairly narrow, which is great when you're threading tiny wires through a PCB, but it can be a bit fiddly for larger joints. I found that swapping to the included chisel tip made soldering a power supply board much smoother. The iron's weight is on the lighter side, so it won't feel like a hammer in your hand, but that also means you need a steady grip, especially when you're applying solder to a component with a lot of heat mass. The grounded plug.